We've been hearing a lot about reforming domestic violence laws, but our children are also victims of brutal crimes. And the family of a murdered Manalapan girl wants laws changed so other innocent children can be saved. Brenda Flanagan reports.
The victim, 6-year-old Amanda Wengert, abducted and brutally murdered in her Manalapan neighborhood. The alleged killer, a family friend, teenager Kevin Aquino, whose history of sex crimes was never divulged. The Wengerts claim if they'd known about Kevin,
I don't think my niece would have been killed.
It's just absolutely wrong for any sex offender to be out in our neighborhoods.
Still angry and grief-stricken, the Wengert family called for legislation to make juvenile criminal records public and offered lawmakers petitions with more than 15,000 signatures in support of juvenile justice reforms. In Aquino's case,
if it had been known by the municipal court judge, for example, that this young man had molested young children 2 years before, it would have been treated differently.
Other reform bills would create a peeping Tom law and would make trespassing on school property a fourth-degree crime, both punishable by 18 months in jail and $7,500 fines. Supporters call it a bill,
a law that would make a real crime, an indictable crime, out of sneaking onto our property and looking through the bathroom window to watch our children bathing. Right now, a person doing just that would have his case heard in traffic court.
Kevin Aquino's records show he was caught trespassing in the girls' bathroom at a local elementary school shortly before Amanda's death. The Wengerts, meanwhile, have filed a lawsuit against the Aquino family for not revealing Kevin's criminal past, and prosecutors have said that they will seek the death penalty against Kevin Aquino. In Trenton, I'm Brenda Flanagan.
A law designed to protect your children from sexual predators has been ruled unconstitutional. A federal judge says you do not have the right to know when a convicted sex offender is moving to your town. Megan's Law requires police registration and community notification for sex offenders. The laws were passed after the murder of 7-year-old Megan Kanka. Alexander Artway was twice convicted of sex crimes but had nothing to do with Megan Kanka.
I'm not a criminal. I'm not a crook. If I made any mistakes, those mistakes were made when I was 23 years old.
The judge said you cannot continue to punish someone who's already paid their debt to society. The judge did uphold police registration for the offenders. Tonight, Megan's parents are outraged, saying the judge is putting the rights of pedophiles ahead of the rights of children.
To protect itself versus the rights of convicted sex offenders who have served their time to go on with their lives in private. 37 states have laws that require released sex offenders to register their names and addresses with the local police. But New Jersey is one of only a few states with a law that provides for the community to be made aware of the presence of such offenders. New Jersey's statute, known as Megan's Law, so named for the 7-year-old girl allegedly killed by a sex offender who lived just across the street, was enacted last October 31st. But this week, a federal judge in Newark struck down the very heart of the law, which is said by him to be unconstitutional. Jason Carroll has more.
A federal judge took the sharpest bite out of Megan's Law. The court ruled the portion of the law that requires notifying communities a sex offender is living in the area is unconstitutional. Legislatures designed the law during the wave of a Get Tough movement that swept through New Jersey after the sexual assaults and murders of 7-year-old Megan Kanka and 6-year-old Amanda Wengert. The families are outraged by the court's ruling.
My daughter has no constitutional rights, Megan Kanka has no constitutional rights, and neither does anybody else who's been a victim of a heinous crime like this.
And from the Kanka family comes this statement. Rich and I are disappointed by the decision that Judge Politan gave today. We feel that Megan's Law is constitutional and will be upheld on appeal. His decision clearly shows this state that he puts more merit on the safety of the pedophile than of our children. Without community notification, what happened to Megan will happen again. We will be in the same spot that we were in before, another sacrifice of a child for the rights of the pedophile. The judge made his controversial ruling after convicted sex offender Alexander Artway challenged the law. Artway served nearly 20 years for sodomizing a 15-year-old girl. His attorneys argued community notification is a law that came about after Artway already served his time, and therefore it would be additional punishment.
I consider it as not a victory, but not a victory for myself, but but it's a partial win.
It is only a partial victory for sex offenders because the judge upheld the portion of Megan's law requiring sex offenders to register with local authorities. And U.S. Attorney Faith Hochberg points out community notification can still apply, although not to convicted sex offenders such as Artway, who were convicted before Megan's law went into effect last October.
Anybody committing a sex offense after the date of Megan's law would still have the community notifications applied to him or her.
But the fact remains, as it stands now, community notification does not apply to the thousands upon thousands of sex offenders convicted before Megan's law went into effect and are due to be released. Jason Carroll, 11 News Close-Up.
It is indeed an emotional issue, and joining us in the studio today, we have with us U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Faith Hochberg. Ms. Hochberg says Megan's law is designed to protect the public and allow the public to protect itself. Ruth Cassell is an attorney with the Prisoners Legal Services of New York. She currently represents paroled sex offender Carl DeFlumer, whose criminal past has kept him spending his freedom in prison. And Paul Schlaflin is vice president of a special interest group, Friends of Amanda, named after the 6-year-old New Jersey girl Amanda Wengert, who was allegedly abducted and killed by a convicted sex offender. Mr. Schlaflin and his group are now lobbying for changes in the juvenile justice system. Welcome. It is a controversy that has stirred the emotions of many people. You say the public has a right to be protected. Judge Politan says the notification provision constitutes more of a form of punishment than a regulatory policy. How do you each respond to that?
Well, we have taken the position in court, and we continue to maintain that the law, the purpose of the law, according to the New Jersey State Legislature, was not punishment. The New Jersey State Legislature reacted to the horrible rapes and deaths of 3 young girls in a 1-year period, which occurred at the hands of ex-sex offenders. And with that knowledge, combined with the extraordinary recidivism rate of these ex-sex offenders, they put this law in place to protect the public.
There is evidence of a high degree of recidivism among sex offenders. You defend and represent some sex offenders who have spent their time in prison. Isn't there some merit that the public should be entitled to some protection?
Well, I think that the history of our country and the history of our jurisprudence is based on the theory that once, if you commit a crime and you are punished, it's assumed that you're rehabilitated, and when you get out of prison, you are entitled to go back and try and get your life together and begin to make contributions to society. And in the case of my client, he, because of the fact that he is a convicted sex offender, has been unable to get out of prison. In New York State, very few people know about it, but we do have something that's akin to Megan's Law, which is the New York State Parole Board has special regulations for the supervision of sex offenders.
All right, I want to get to the specific of your case in a moment. But let's talk overall. You had the word yourself, is assumed rehabilitated. But there are some serious sex offenders who are so troubled that even with all the treatment, they go back and they commit the crime again. And the evidence is there that there is this high degree of repeated offenses. Shouldn't the public be entitled to some protection against these individuals?
I think that the best protection the public can get is people doing more research in how to help sex offenders get over their problems and spend our money in do rehabilitation, both in prison and outside of prison, rather than tattooing sex offenders with the stigma for their whole life of being a sex offender. The community notification statutes not only stigmatize the sex offender, but stigmatize his family, his friends, and everybody in the group with whom the sex offender deals with on a daily basis.
Paul, that is true. They say that it's a lifelong albatross. It's like in the ancient times when they would brand the criminals.
Well, that certainly isn't the fault of my children. So why should my children be at risk because of their release, their anonymous release into a community? How is anyone going to sit down and explain to the Wangerts and the Kankas that they will have no more ability to protect their remaining children than what they had to protect the ones that they lost, the previously convicted sex offenders who anonymously moved back into the community?
Now, the law still holds in New Jersey, Megan's Law, where these released offenders still have to register with their local law enforcement agencies, correct?
That's correct.
Is that not adequate protection? Why is it necessary to have the community notification as well if already the authorities know where the individual is?
Because the concept of this law is that with certain sex offenders, as to whom findings are made that they are a serious risk of reoffense, that the community should have a right to know so that parents can take primary responsibility for protecting their own kids, walk them to school another way, drive them to school, at least know where the danger lurks in your own neighborhood. And with respect to the treatment that Ruth mentioned, we're all in favor of treatment, but that should occur during the period of incarceration. And New Jersey's statute is carefully keyed so that if treatment is successful, then the findings can often be made that the ex-offender is only in the Tier 1 level of notification, in which case there would be no notification to community groups or to people in the neighborhood, but simply to the police, as currently stands with the law.
Please explain that. There's been some conflict in, first we had the federal court decision, which strikes down the notification provision, and then prior to that, a New Jersey Superior Court ruling came out which upheld the registration, but certain ramifications of the notification. Would you explain that to us, please?
There are several different decisions, and I think it's important not to get mired down into the technicalities of each one of them. There was a New Jersey state court decision that preceded the federal decision, and in that decision, the judge in essence held that he was concerned about who would make the determination that an ex-offender belonged in either Tier 2 or Tier 3, the two more serious tiers, in which case there would be notification to community groups and to the citizens. And the judge in that case wanted to be sure that the decision-making was done by a neutral fact finder.
Okay, we're going to continue this discussion in just a moment. First, we have to take a break. Stay with us as 11 News Close-Up continues. Today's discussion, Megan's Law. Welcome back. Ruth Cassell, you are an attorney with the Prisoners Legal Services of New York, and you defend their rights, and they claim once they pay their debt to society, they have a right to go on with their lives. But some of the sex offenders have committed such violent crimes, and there's such a high expectation of many of these people committing similar crimes again in the future. Shouldn't such individuals expect that the moment that they commit the crime, that there should be no expectation of privacy again in their future?
Why? Why are sex offenders so different than any other kind of offenders? What this reminds me of is when the AIDS epidemic first began, people wanted to put tattoos on the heads of people with AIDS. This is the same kind of public-driven kind of legislation and public outcry that's the result of a few heinous crimes.
You asked the why, and I'm basing it upon mostly of what I've been reading.
And I just want to respond to Faith when she spoke about the fact that she thought that this community notification would help. I mean, if it was geared to help protect children, it might be one thing. But sex offenders, if they want to recidivate, can certainly leave their homes and go to other areas and do it. It lets the public have a false sense of security because they think that it's not going to happen anymore because they know about it. That's really not true.
No, it's 100% true. Let me explain something. Our children today are very well versed in how to deal with strangers. Strangers don't really present the problem for our children anymore. It's a trusted neighbor, a trusted member of the community that's hidden his sexual past from us. That was the case in both Amanda Wangert and Megan Kanka. Both of these people were killed allegedly by gentlemen that were members of their community, trusted members of their community.
I'd also like to address your question of why sex offenders. They do present a statistically much, much greater likelihood of recidivism, and therefore they pose a much greater danger to innocent people that live around them. What we're trying to do is prevent the next generation of victims. This isn't just about victims' rights, it's about preventing people from becoming victims at all. That's the goal here. And with respect to your point about stigma, the stigma results from their own heinous crime. If you commit a crime in our society, you don't have a right of privacy about that crime. If I indict a person, that indictment's public. The arrest is public. The trial must be public according to our Constitution, and the sentencing is public. Even parole hearings and release dates are public. So a person, once he commits this kind of crime, doesn't have the right to keep it private. It is public knowledge.
Is part of the problem perhaps is we don't know how to deal with these people when they are incarcerated, that they're not getting the adequate treatment? There's been a good deal of criticism of the Diagnostic Treatment Center for Violent Sex Offenders in New Jersey for having inadequate programs to deal with these people.
There are no programs.
And I know that in New York State, there are no programs.
So maybe we're falling down. Why should sex offenders, let me raise this question over here on the prosecutorial side, why should sex offenders be treated any different than any other criminal who does go in and goes through the period of rehabilitation? If they're not coming out properly rehabilitated, perhaps it's the fault of the state not giving them the adequate treatment.
They should certainly get treatment, but we should not visit the dangers of an untreated ex-sex offender on the next Meghan Kanka living in our neighborhood.
Isn't there some validity in that? I know you defend these people, but isn't there some validity in that? If you had a child and someone moved into your neighborhood and had a history of sex offenses, would you not be concerned?
Of course I'd be concerned. I'd be concerned
But if you
also
didn't know
if there was
about it-
somebody that was a murderer or a drug addict, or somebody when
Sure.
I drive my car, that there's somebody who's had a bunch of convictions for drunken driving. I'd worry about it. But I do not think that that's a reason to take away. What you're doing is taking away the right of a person who may have made one mistake in their life, his right to find a job, find an apartment, get out of prison. What you're doing is stigmatizing them forever. And that's wrong.
To not do that is to take away my knowledge and my ability to protect my children.
No, you
and
can
that is the
always
key
protect
issue.
your children.
No, I can't.
You
Without,
as a parent, of course you can protect your children. You can tell your children if there are two people living in a house, do not go there.
Not
do
if
not
I don't
go
know.
to place.
If these are not the boogeymen. When you go to Avenel, you do not see the boogeymen. You see accountants, you see
Avenel's the
lawyers.
treatment center.
Yes, in New Jersey. These people aren't obvious to you that there's a problem with them. In the case of Jesse Temendaquaz, here's a young man that's coming over and helping Megan's father work on the car and repair the roof. She sees this man interacting with her father. Her father had no knowledge of his past. So when Jesse said, "Come look at my new puppy," she never thought twice. Now, how do you go about protecting against that situation without that knowledge of who this person is?
I would not argue that what happened to this child was an absolutely horrendous thing.
But
And
it's
it shouldn't
not
happen to
isolated.
any
It's
child.
not isolated. It
is
happened
not
twice
that
in New Jersey
But it
last
is
year.
not that common.
How do you
And to
weigh it?
make
Is it
a
one
whole
life lost
system
is
of
too many?
laws, what I agree with you, but to make a whole law which takes away a whole group of people's privacy and their right to rehabilitation
I have a
based
problem
on
with rights.
1, 2, 3 instances is not right.
The law does
what would
not
be
grant a
inappropriate?
privacy right under these circumstances.
Well, what about what Judge Politan has suggested? Maybe this should be made part of the penalty at the time of sentencing, that they lose the right of privacy or has to have the notification.
That's fine for the future.
That would be
but
a
what about the 750 violent sexual predators in Avenel now?
We have
that are
about
going to be
4,000
released?
people who would be affected by this, and they would have virtual immunity from anyone ever knowing where they live if this law is upheld. Is that
They
correct?
have had virtual immunity since this country was started for people
I'm
knowing
not saying
who they
necessarily
are.
it was right.
Not now, not.
Right.
But the state legislature has a right to protect the citizens of the state of New Jersey. It is acted in the interest of public safety, and with that being its purpose, it's certainly one of its duties is to protect the citizenry. It's passed this law to do that, and the law should be upheld for that reason.
And I have real questions. For example, if it's considered to be additional punishment, what happens to our whole system of trying sex offenders? Because what will happen, that many sex offenders will be able to take pleas to charges less than sex offense because they know that they're going to have lifelong stigma if they get found guilty of a sex offense. And I worry about the whole system of pleas that have already been taken when, if it's determined to be additional punishment, because then people might be able to argue validly that when they took their plea, they thought they were taking a plea to a couple of years in prison. They didn't know that for the rest of their lives they will not be able to find an apartment, find a job, and live apart from the harassment of all their neighbors.
We have to take a break. When we come back, I want to find out, is this going to be tied up in the courts for years, all the way up to the Supreme Court? We'll find out from our panel of experts when 11 News Close-Up continues. Megan's Law is the discussion this morning, and part of that being struck down in New Jersey this past week, the part that requires the notification of the community of the presence of a released sex offender. There's one area here that's created such a frenzy, and there have been 40 notifications in New Jersey so far, and one of them resulted in a vigilante attack on what turned out to be the wrong man. Isn't there the possibility of such a thing really magnifying if this law does take effect?
I should say that the Attorney General of New Jersey is investigating and will prosecute any vigilante attacks that occur in New Jersey. There's no greater danger of a vigilante attack on an ex-sex offender than there is the danger of a vigilante attack on anyone who is indicted for a heinous crime.
Yeah, but those individuals indicted, their addresses and whereabouts aren't required to be made public, as this law would require sex offenders' addresses to be known.
Actually, much of that information is in the public record, and when indictments and arrests occur and those persons get out on bail, they are out in the community and people do know where they are. And I should say that the vast majority of the notifications that have occurred have gone quite smoothly with no concerns and no vigilante.
Paul, you deal with parents, and parents get incensed. There's nothing worse than the thought of a child being attacked by a sex offender.
Absolutely.
They want to take things in their own hands.
Well, you've always had that. There was a time in this country where somebody arrested for murder was dragged out and hanged. We didn't stop arrests. We dealt with vigilantism. Should it occur, we'll have to deal with it this time also.
We're talking about protecting our side. Meantime, over here, Ruth Casal is talking about protecting her clients, the sex offenders, including Carl DeFlumer, is that correct? Who has been released conditionally by New York State, but because he cannot be accepted in the community, he has to continue spending his time in prison.
Yes.
Explain that, briefly.
Under New York State law, after a person completes 2/3 of their sentence, it's mandatory that they be released. Carl's mandatory release date was in September. He had planned to go to his sister's house near Albany. When there was community notification by the parole board pursuant to their regulations. On the morning he was going to be released, the media was camped out there. His sister withdrew permission because she was afraid for his safety, and he was taken into the parole office and made to sign an agreement to go back to prison,
So that's
where he's been since then.
Okay, let me turn to the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey. A federal judge has struck down this element of Megan's Law as unconstitutional. Your boss, the Attorney General, says she still considers it constitutional and will continue working on the federal level to see that these laws are implemented. What's the next step for you as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in New Jersey?
We will become involved and again support the state of New Jersey as the party in the Third Circuit that will be appealing the denial of this provision of Megan's Law. We believe that it is constitutional, and we will continue to press those arguments in court. It is important because there is a federal law called the Jacob Wetterling Law, named after a little boy in Minnesota who was also abducted at gunpoint at the age of 11 years old. That law encourages all of the states to adopt registration laws for ex-sex offenders, and it also contains community notification provisions under the appropriate circumstances.
So the immediate thing is just to follow this, and you're going to have to see this through the courts. We're talking about some lengthy period of time, years perhaps.
Well, the parties in this case do intend to try to expedite the appeal, and yes, we will stay with this through the court system.
All the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
However far it takes us, we are committed to supporting the states when they enact these kinds of laws all done under the federal Jacob Wetterling Act, which encourages them to do so, and we will support the states.
And Ruth, you're going to continue your appeals as well.
Well, we're going to file leave to go to the New York State Court of Appeals with regard to the failure of my client to be released on a writ of habeas corpus.
And as far as concerned parents, concerned citizens?
Well, I feel that in New Jersey we're spending far too much money trying to fix what is broken beyond repair, in so much as the adult sex offender. In 1993, we had 235 rapes committed by children, 10 of them by children under the age of 10, yet we have a single 18-bed facility to deal with them. My goal is to close Avenel as an adult facility and rededicate that building and the $28 million budget that goes along with it to treating the juvenile sex offenders. That's the root cause of adult predation, the untreated juvenile sex offender.
What about, as Judge Politan suggests, maybe stiffer laws, stiffer penalties, lock them up and throw away the key?
We need all of that, but we have to deal with the sex offenders that are out there now that can't be touched with additional sentencing.
Shaking head as expected would be Ruth Cassell here.
Of course.
No.
Well, not throwing away the key.
Not
if we put
literally,
people
but we're
in
talking
prison,
about
I mean, we
stiffer
should do
penalties and making
something.
that part of the penalty. That if once a sex offender, particularly a repeat sex offender, that should be notified, the community should know of his whereabouts.
No, not community notification.
Okay, not an easy subject to deal with in the short period of time we have. I'd like to thank you all for sharing your insight with us, and that is it for this edition of 11 News Close-Up. And thanks to our guests, the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Faith Hochberg, Ruth Cassell, an attorney with Prisoners Legal Services, and Megan's Law activist Paul Schlaflin. Up next on Best Talk, Valerie Coleman-Morris takes a look at the alternative high school, the Wildcat Academy. I'm Marvin Scott. Be sure to join us for the Channel 11 News at 10 tonight. I'm Marvin Scott. Have a great day.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the nice weather this weekend. Here's a look at some of the stories we'll be reporting on tonight.
A child's murder in Manalapan leaves her neighbors outraged and puzzled. I'm Marianne O'Donnell. I'll have the story.
A select group of Monmouth County High School football players are honored for their achievements. I'm David Tapp, and I'll have that story.
And we'll have highlights of the Belmar St. Patrick's Day Parade, Bill Eastman Day in Manasquan, and in sports, the final of the Northeast Conference Tournament between Monmouth and Rider College. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Neighbors of a little Manalapan girl found murdered this weekend are in shock and puzzled. Marianne O'Donnell reports.
19-year-old Kevin Aquino was led into a Monmouth County courtroom this afternoon, one day after being charged with kidnapping and murdering 6-year-old Amanda Wengert. Police say the child was killed sometime late Saturday evening or early Sunday morning. The victim lived just a few doors away from Aquino on Cherry Hill Lane, one of many quiet middle-class streets in Manalapan. This morning, the little girl's uncle spoke briefly with reporters.
You know, the terrible tragedy that happened, and hopefully no one else will ever have to go through something like this.
Now, according to the Monmouth County prosecutor, Amanda Wengert was asleep on a couch inside her family's den when Aquino broke in and kidnapped the little girl. But what makes this story even more tragic, say neighbors, is that the parents of both the suspect and victim were good friends. In fact, the two couples were together that night at a neighborhood party just a few doors from here. And when the Wengerts returned home early Sunday morning, they realized their daughter was missing. Assistant Prosecutor Alton Kenny describes what happened next.
The police contacted one of the assisting agencies who have police tracking dogs. The tracking dogs made a complete path of the area and went immediately back to 60 Alexandria Drive, which is the home of Kevin Aquino. And at approximately 4:17, the body of Amanda Wengert was found.
Kenny says the suspect either carried or dragged the little girl into the woods behind his home, but Kenny would not say how the child died or whether she had been sexually assaulted. Even so, this neighbor says he isn't surprised to hear that Kevin Aquino is being charged with her murder.
He was a little messed up there. Something seriously was wrong with that kid.
In fact, Aquino already has a police record. Authorities say he was charged back in October with trespassing in a girls' restroom at a local elementary school, and that news has infuriated parents inside and outside this community. You know, there was talk that he had been picked up once or twice before.
In the schools around here, they found him.
Does that make you angry? Or?
Yeah, very.
What do you think they should have done? Do you think they should have done?
Put him away then.
Paul Schlaflin of Marlboro says he was so upset he had to come to the courthouse today.
I wanted to see the animal that did this. I also would like to know from somebody, and I'm sure I won't get an answer here today, why he was on the street and allowed to do this.
Aquino is being held at the Monmouth County Jail on $575,000 bail. No trial date has been set. In Freehold, Marianne O'Donnell, TV 34 News.
If found guilty, Aquino faces 30 years to life in prison. New Jersey American Water.
They worked constantly together and they acted like one big happy family. But nothing will ever be the same in their tight-knit community because one of their own has been murdered and another one of their own stands accused. Mary Garafello reports.
When is the school system going to take more into account of our children's safety? That should come first.
The parents in Manalapan, New Jersey are angry.
Promise everyone here that the buddy system will be instituted tomorrow!
They want to be able to fight back after tragedy tore apart their tight-knit suburb a week and a half ago.
It's just the sickest thing. It's always been a calm, very close community, and nothing like this has ever happened.
But the unthinkable did happen to little 6-year-old Amanda Wengert.
I remember her as being a very shy, quiet child. She was liked by all of her classmates. Always had a smile on her face.
Little Amanda lived in this central New Jersey flatlands town. The neighbors on Alexandria Drive and Cherry Hill Lane were closer than most. Amanda's parents, Ron and Karen Wengert, lived just 3 doors away from Hector and Carmela Aquino.
They were friends with one another. They took vacations together. They partied together. They were very close.
But that closeness was shattered on the evening of March 5th. In a nearby house, the Wengerts, Aquinos, and 5 other couples were at an anniversary party for the Aquinos. Amanda and her 9- and 3-year-old sisters were left at home with the Aquinos' 10-year-old son.
Twice during the course of the party, 2 adult fathers left the party, went back to the Wengert house, checked on the kids just to make sure everything was okay.
Police say sometime between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., someone broke into the Wengerts' house and snatched Amanda in a blanket as she slept. They say that person took the little girl out through a sliding glass door and beat her to death with his bare hands. Search dogs found her body 2 hours later behind the Aquino's house. Police believe Amanda had been sexually assaulted.
After the scene was processed, police went to the Aquino home and arrested Kevin Aquino.
Many residents of Manalapan were shocked that the suspect was a boy who'd grown up among them, the Aquino's 19-year-old son. He'd been a model employee at a nearby fast food restaurant.
He was fine. The police were familiar with this young man.
Police say Kevin Aquino was a ticking time bomb. He'd been arrested last October 8th for lurking in the girls' restroom at Pine Brook Elementary School. Earlier on the same day, he'd been told to get out of nearby Lafayette Mills Elementary School, according to Superintendent Joe Scazzari.
At that time, we pressed charges of trespass because that's the only charge that was appropriate according to the police investigation.
On December 7th, Aquino pleaded guilty to trespassing and paid a $200 fine. School officials sent Kevin's picture and a memo to staff members. But parents first learned about it in news reports after the murder of little Amanda.
You should have notified the parents of what went on in that school. There's no damn difference. If the guy pulled down his pants in that school, you wouldn't have told the parents what he did either.
Superintendent Scazzari says he thought it would have been illegal to distribute Kevin's picture to anyone other than school staff.
I was advised by the local police, the county prosecutor, and our own attorney that had I gone beyond that, I would be violating the person's rights.
Mr. Scazzari's attitude that, well, you know, he's more concerned about the civil rights of the criminal versus what could have been potential victims.
County Attorney John Kay believes none of that probably would have done any good.
This young man's activities have been concentrated essentially in a 1-block area between a number of families, all of whom knew his background. Sending his photograph and information about him to those people wouldn't have made any difference.
But Amanda's parents say they never knew about yet another disturbing aspect of Kevin's terrifying past. As a juvenile, he had been convicted of raping children 3 times before, including one of his own relatives.
There was some other incidents which I can't discuss ethically.
But there was plenty of talk about Kevin among high school students.
He used to wait outside the bus stops and wait for the girls to get off the bus, and he used to bother them.
And just last month, Kevin Aquino had been arrested for harassment when he allegedly asked a 13-year-old girl to come into his house. She refused. The latest disclosures have only fueled the burning demands of parents that something be done to keep people like Kevin Aquino off the streets.
Is there anyone here that has to sign a petition? It's very important.
Paul Schlaflin is circulating petitions in support of a so-called Peeping Tom law.
This would enable law enforcement officials to arrest, detain, and force into evaluation any potential sex offender.
But Kevin had been through counseling and released, all in accordance with the law.
Whether or not counseling ever helps a sex offender is very doubtful. It's just a hope that their conduct can be restrained.
As Kevin Aquino stands charged with murder, kidnapping, and burglary, the people of Manalapan must find empty solace in the justice system that didn't protect little Amanda.
Now that this terrible thing has happened, I mean, our action here will be swift and it will be exacting. We will do our job. Unfortunately, that's not going to do anything for Amanda.
Kevin Aquino's lawyer had no comment at this time.
Confidentiality laws should apply to teenage criminals. Channel 2's John Slattery reports now from an angry town meeting.
If officials knew more about Kevin Aquino's past, could the life of 6-year-old Amanda Weingart have been saved? Many people here say yes, possibly.
Her memory reminds us that secrecy does result in death.
A gathering in Manalapan tonight. State Assembly members and people who want confidentiality rules regarding juvenile records revised and loosened. The people here think the system stinks when police and school officials were apparently unaware that Kevin Aquino, while a juvenile, was convicted for sexually assaulting 3 children. This neighbor of Aquino, who has a 5-year-old daughter himself, says neighbors have a need to know.
The people of Cherry Hill Lane did not know the past infractions that Kevin Aquino committed.
Governor Christie Whitman last week endorsed a new package of legislation that would allow greater access to juvenile records by law enforcement agencies, school officials, even the public. Manalapan's school superintendent certainly favors the changes.
It is not uncommon for juveniles to be moved from one school to another without the schools having access to prior records and/or without the ability to disclose the record if they obtain the information.
Another supporter is Jim O'Brien, whose adult daughter was raped and murdered in 1982 by a man who had an extensive juvenile record.
And if the authorities knew of those acts, they could have treated him a lot better as far as sentencing him for the first acts he did as an adult. It didn't happen.
They're calling the proposed legislation the Amanda Act. Sponsors are predicting passage before the next school year begins. In Manalapan, New Jersey, John Slattery, Channel 2 News.